Welcome, everyone. We'll call the school committee meeting to order at about 7:03. If you would, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Bless you. We're having heckles from the crowd. So welcome, everyone. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to conduct interviews for the position of superintendent. We have joining us tonight Dr. Glenn Brand. Thank you for joining us. I don't think you've had an opportunity to meet everyone, although you may have. So I think it might be a nice idea for us to each introduce ourselves to you. Manny, would you?
Hello. Hi. Welcome. Manny Mullis. We met a little while ago. It was nice speaking with you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
MJ Burns. Again, pleasure meeting you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Jen Bryson.
Steve Bjork, welcome. Thank you.
Julie Broussard.
Peggy Kane, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Tom Talbot, thanks for coming.
I should also acknowledge that we conducted 2 interviews last night, and due to a family emergency, I was not able to attend. So I think it appropriate to ask the committee if they feel it would be appropriate for me to participate in tonight's interviews. Does anyone have any objection to that? All right, seeing none, we will continue. Again, welcome, Dr. Brand. Thanks for making the trip. I understand you had a very, very long day.
I did, but it was a great day. Thank you for the hospitality and the chance to get to know your community and your schools better. Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll start out with questions from the committee, and then we'll give you a few minutes at the end to give us some closing comments.
Terrific. Thank you.
Start with Manny.
Hi, good evening. So you've had a long day today. You've had an opportunity to spend time with teachers, administrators, and different members of the community. You talked to members of the staff. Could you tell us a little bit of how we compare to the district that you're coming from? Some similarities, some differences, and just kind of an overall comparison.
Sure. Well, good evening, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here as you explore my candidacy as your next superintendent. It's a privilege and pleasure to be here, and I welcome the opportunity to further the exploration today. The opportunity to see your district in person is quite a different thing than reading about it or watching some of your meetings, as I've had the chance to do over the last number of weeks. But to be able to actually get into the schools and speak with staff and learn a little bit more about what's on people's minds here was truly insightful. Let me start with the similarities for your question. First off, what borrowed today for me was what I thought, and that is that you have a community here that is very deeply invested in your schools and is committed to partnering with public education. That came through time and time again in my conversations, and I read about that, and that was part of the initial attraction. Everything from having a Wilmington Education Foundation as an outreach effort from the community to help make programs or additional services possible. The deep investment by members of the school committee, the PTOs, and so many other organizations throughout the towns that I heard about in service to students. A very deep similarity in that sense. The similarity around investing in and exploring social emotional learning, and that as a priority in terms of programming, that not only is it a case that you are looking to have in place a robust academic program, but as well strong commitment to building social emotional competencies and putting in place learning programs to help support students overall. So I saw deep partnerships, and that is exciting and really important to me to be able to see and learn about, because that's part of the keen attraction for being here and in Wilmington, the belief that in order to have an effective school system and effective schools, you need to have strong partnerships in place between students, between staff, and between members of the community. I heard about some of the professional development and the commitment to professional development programs, which is deeply important to advancing teaching and learning. And there's a strong similarity between all of the most recent districts that I've had the chance to serve, certainly in the case of Acton-Boxborough. I heard about and learned about the incorporation of technology and your commitment to further expanding and pushing that into the classrooms to help support teaching and learning. All representative to me of you as a district with a strong desire, led by your leadership team, to move the district forward. I heard about strong teaming with your administrative team. Time and time again, I heard around principals working together, whether it be a smaller subset depending on the building configuration and the grade levels being served, or the wider group and leadership team as a whole. Commitment to partnering together, to helping one another towards improving the programs either in their school or the district as a whole. All of things that are very, very similar to the district that I most recently served in. And again, all of those kind of things that I'm very much interested in becoming a part of for a district to continue in service. Some of the differences to the latter part of your question. Certainly a regional school setting as that of Acton-Boxborough is quite different than a town setting, both in the fact that it's servicing two towns to start with, but also all of the respective financial implications that come with building budgets and dealing with some of the more the nuances associated with a regional school district, such things as through the budget managing healthcare and healthcare costs or health insurance costs, such things as excess and deficiency, or E&D as it's sometimes referred to. Those are definitely differences between Acton-Boxborough and a town setting such as yours here in Wilmington. The difference is in having to deal with multiple FinComs and multiple governing bodies is certainly a difference. And one of the things that's very appealing to me to think about returning to a town setting like Wilmington, where there is one finance committee and one selectman group to be able to interface with and really build strong relationships is something that is very attractive to me. I guess finally, the difference certainly that I'd speak about is the structure of your district. Having the multiple transitions and the multiple buildings is something that is unique and different. In Acton-Boxborough, we had a K to 6 setting, and then a 7th, 8th grade building, and then the high school, similar grade configuration. And so I was intrigued to be able to see and learn a little bit more about that. I was struck when I first started to learn about your school system in terms of your population and the number of buildings you had. And it was insightful to be able to see that at play. And so there's certainly a difference there. And my understanding is there perhaps down the road could be some change or changing structure as you may explore possible building projects. But there's certainly an aspect there that's different from what I'm used to.
Thank you.
MJ.
Okay, thanks. In seeing that you started off your education and career in Ontario, Canada, I'd be interested in learning how education in Canada is different from the education in Massachusetts, and how the experience of teaching in two different countries has impacted you as an educator and a leader.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So there definitely are differences, I think, between the two settings. First off, and I spoke about this a little bit earlier in some of the groups that I was a part of. In Ontario, there is a very large regionalized approach to the provision of public services, not just in education, but in other things such as fire and police services. And that regionalization is not in the same sense that we might have been just talking about in Acton-Boxborough, but much greater regionalization encompassing far more communities, whether they be cities or considered smaller towns. And as a point of reference, the school district that I left before moving here to Massachusetts into the United States in 2002 was in a suburban area just outside of Toronto. And the district there, when I left, had approximately 150,000 students, 165 schools, and about 10,000 employees. And so the magnitude of the operation vastly different, as I've come to learn, than the smaller town reality that is at least in place in Massachusetts or New England. However, at the same time, the economies of scale was quite interesting to observe. I remember well as a beginning teacher in Ontario, where in that district there was I forget the exact title of the department, but a teaching and learning department that had dozens and dozens of people in service to teachers to provide all kinds of resources to help support the work as a teacher in classrooms. And that held true for a variety of other things. So certainly some great differences there. But the similarities that I found in moving here are quite not significant, but quite comparable in the sense of a deep commitment to needing to map your curriculum and instruction and assessment. My first position here, as you know, was in Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District, and from every point thereafter, the deep investment and commitment to ensuring that the curriculum is aligned and both vertically and horizontally is a piece that has to be present, I think, in any setting. And so that I've come to see play out in all of the communities that I've served. I suppose that the biggest difference, though, that I've had a chance now, having worked in a number of different communities, is truly the fact of the investment on a local level that I've seen time and time again in many of the communities that I've had the privilege to work in. The smaller nature of the design of the schools and school systems certainly may not have the same economies of scale that I experienced and was a part of in Ontario. But at the same time, the investment and the local participation is felt far more differently. And in the work that I do and am deeply invested and committed to leading, that's a wonderful thing. And I've experienced that in many of the communities that I've had the good fortune to serve. And my same sense is that's here in Wilmington too, and that's very much what I want to continue to be a part of.
Thank you very much.
I have a question about, you mentioned vertical and horizontal alignment, which sort of leads into my question about making decisions about curriculum and how you use data to make those decisions. So I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about the vertical horizontal piece and then how you might use data to make decisions about things to add to or take away.
Sure. So the vertical and horizontal alignment, I think, needs to be in place for curriculum as well as truly in many other respects, the service that's provided by a school system. When I think about that, I'm thinking about the reality that in any school system, we have students for a very short period of time, relatively speaking, and the need to ensure that there is a continuum that's planned out for students from the very first time that they're going to step into our classrooms in pre-kindergarten or kindergarten until the time that they leave. There needs to be a clear articulation for what knowledge, skills, and understanding students are going to need to know and be able to do along that pathway, so that we can have the assurance that when we're graduating a youngster with Wilmington Public Schools on their diploma, there is an assuredness that they have all of those components along the way and that they've been planned out and thoughtfully aligned. The same thing holds true with the horizontal alignment. No matter which school you may attend, a child may attend, we should put in place assurances that there are similar experiences for them. I very much, this alignment piece, I know you're speaking or focusing specifically on curriculum, but at a much deeper level for me, it holds true for all of the other services we provide. There's a saying that I won't take credit for inventing, but I certainly along the way came to believe it. It's simplistic, but it's this, that I believe that we should have in place a school system and not a system of schools. And where I've experienced different settings, sometimes that holds true, and it holds true in the sense that there are vast differences that are being taken in terms of the provision of learning experiences for students. And I think that in the public education setting, where we are as a school committee or as a superintendent, really truly charged with ensuring and overseeing a school system that provides a similar experience for all students, I think that that's where that alignment absolutely needs to come in. So the horizontal and vertical articulation. The data piece has to be a foundation for which, as a school leadership team, we're making decisions upon. That I do firmly believe that There's far too much to try and do within the confines, reasonably speaking, of approximately 180 days of school. And there needs to be very critical decisions made around what we're going to provide for a program for our students. And the data that needs to be captured to inform decisions becomes so essential. We are data rich in education, which is a good thing, and if we provide training and knowledge and understanding for our educators and our leaders to know how to be able to use data effectively, to know what data to utilize, that should and can become a basis for the important decision making, whether it be around piloting or exploring the introduction of 2 or 3 possible programs, if there's a change in direction being sought, or whether it being an analysis of a particular teaching approach. Capturing data to help inform decision making, I think, is fundamental. And it can't just happen, from my experience. Having been a teacher, a school leader, and a superintendent now, it doesn't necessarily just happen organically. But when there's a plan that's developed to set out to capture certain data, to clarify how it's going to be used to inform a decision, that's upon which we need, I think, to make our decisions upon. And certainly, one of the great things about the technology is the great ability to leverage data in a way that was very different from 5, 10, 15 years ago. So, thank you.
All right, Dr. Brand, I'd like to present you with a scenario, a difficult scenario, and just get an idea of how you process and react to a situation like this. You're visiting an elementary school when a report of a suspicious person on the grounds leads to a lockdown. As soon as the lockdown protocol has been implemented, a parent buzzes at the front door for entrance. How do you handle that situation? What would you do?
May I clarify, does the parent get into the building?
It's just buzzed so far, and you're in
Okay.
you're in the front office and hear this.
Okay. So I'll start by saying that I believe that as superintendent of schools, there are an awful lot of responsibilities that one in this role has to oversee. First and foremost is safety and security. And I'm proud to be able to say that beginning my tenure in school leadership as a assistant principal and then making my way to the principalship, assistant superintendent, superintendency, one very foundational piece of my work and commitment in the staffs that I've been leading has absolutely been centered around safety and security, because there is an expectation, as there appropriately should be, by any person, myself being a parent, when you send your child to school, there should be a foundational expectation that they are going to be safe, children are going to be safe. And that has to be paramount. And I was excited to hear, if I can use that term, excited to hear today along my walk-arounds, an awful lot of what sounds to be good work that you as a school district have been taking in partnership with the police and fire to try and ensure that your buildings are safe. It sounded to me very proactive as opposed to reactive, which is what I believe is critically important. In the scenario that you described, if the decision has been made following appropriate protocols, which I'm going to assume that they are, that building is locked down, it's locked down. And that at that moment in time, I'm going to make the clear assumption here that there was something that led to that decision to lock that building down, and it needs to be locked down. Having myself been through a couple of lockdowns in a variety of different buildings, I know what that's like to go through. But when you have staff that are trained to understand how to respond and a protocol is being followed to lock it down, it's locked down. And until there can be enough information gathered to release that lockdown, the building stays locked down. That release, and if a subsequent question would be, how would I know? It certainly would be through a variety of means, including partnering with the police and the responding officers to the respective scene, with the leadership team to ascertain whatever the particular, I'll use the word threat is, that may have led to that. But that building's locked down. And at that moment in time, that's a critical decision that's made, but at that point, until there can be assurances that there's no reason to be in that mode, you need to stay in that mode. I would trust and hope that the staff have had the appropriate training to also respond appropriately to ensure the safety of children, the safety of staff as a whole, but that needs to be preserved until there can be a reasonable belief that it can be cleared or changed.
Thank you.
Kind of along the same vein, but delving into it a little bit more, some would certainly say that superintendents need to be masters at public relations. So in those delicate situations, and the situation you just referred to and you explained for us, how would you ensure that parents and staff members and the community at large really feels that they have the information that they need in a timely manner so that they feel comfortable, while at the same time maintaining confidentiality and following the law?
So another primary responsibility is communication on behalf of the organization. And I do absolutely believe that in my role as superintendent, that I need to be the lead communicator and spokesperson for the district on behalf of the school committee if the school committee itself may not be engaged in that particular pursuit or discussion. And communication with stakeholders is what's expected. There needs to be clear lines of communication with the citizenry, and sometimes that might be just parents or guardians in general. It might be the wider community around the events and occurrences that are taking place in our school system. And I absolutely, unfortunately, but have had the opportunity and need in a couple of different situations that were not so dissimilar to the scenario that was just momentarily presented. And what I've learned along the way is that there is an urgency sometimes for communication that needs to be pushed out, and it's becoming even more daunting and challenging in this day and age with social media and the rapidness at which that can be engaged. But that a message can still be thoughtfully constructed to be able to keep people respectively in the loop or informed, even if it's just, this is going on, more information to come later. That I've definitely learned that trying to keep pace with the reality of hundreds and hundreds of cell phones throughout a building or throughout a district is daunting. It's near impossible to be able to beat that. But what I believe is only reasonable and actually should be expected by citizens of a town for which I'm serving is that there is communication that is clear, that's concise, and that's well-timed. And the pursuit of that is also through multiple mediums. I found that to be the case as well, too. That is to say, resting every communication outreach through one venue only, for example, an email, is not suffice anymore, I don't believe. That leveraging technology, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, to also be able to push out messaging, so whether it be Twitter or whether it be Facebook or whether it be some other means, along with email, along with an automated phone system, which most districts I think have, hitting the messaging from multiple angles, if you will, is essential. It's needed. And I found that I think it's in a better position to be overly communicative to try and ensure that you're going to hit as many people, as many stakeholders as possible with that. Sometimes, depending on the specific situation, having a community meeting or community forum to be able to explain or review something in person can also go a long way. In no way do I want to suggest that I think everything around communication centers with technology. It doesn't. I think that there's an appropriate time for conversations as well, too, depending on the issue. But people, I recognize, people expect clear and timely information to be able to stay informed. And that includes communication sometimes to different groups. School committee, as a primary means, I pride myself in ensuring that the school committee knows about messaging before it goes out, to the degree that that's absolutely possible. There are different stakeholder groups. But it's what people, I think, expect, and they expect that when they send their child to a school or to a school system.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to change the topic a little bit. One of the things when we first built this high school that I was uncomfortable with, and I'm still uncomfortable with, I realized today, so I want to ask you about that. When we were in the library, waiting in the library, I was looking around the library, and I was thinking, this isn't a library the same way that we used to have libraries, and on top of that, there's only 2 shelves of, 1, 2, maybe give them 4 shelves of books, of actual books that started out in the library. I feel, I would, so what I'm just going to ask you is, what would you see as today's library in a high school, and how could it be used? I'm not sure how we use our library, because I'm not sure that it's big enough to do research. It certainly does, they expected to use computers, but I don't see any computers in there. So, so taking it away from our library, I'd really like to know what, in your travels, if you've seen other libraries, high school libraries, and what they contain.
So when I think about a library media center, and I intentionally use that word media piece, because I do think that that's part and parcel with any such environment now. I think that we are at a place in time in which we should try and foster environments where students, and I'll stick with the high school piece because that's what you sort of led the question with, that are flexible spaces that provide for an opportunity for students to collaborate with one another, if that's what indeed they're needing to do for a particular assignment or class, or to be able to pursue something independently. But that there's a flexibility, not a rigidness, but a flexibility in the use of that space. And that can be furniture, that can be technology, that can be access to materials that might be present. That we know, and I believe, that our students of the current era, the current generation, and goodness only knows what it might look like 10 years from now, are accessing and have access to information from all different sources. And I would hope that we're structuring a library media center that is inviting for students, that's welcoming for them to be able to want to go there, not just to hang out, but to go there to be constructive or productive, but also know that they can be flexible with their use of that space. And I do know, having been a part of some building projects and building planning recently, that that's also the thinking around the architecture of such learning spaces, and in general in schools, having flexible spaces to be able to try and keep current with the changing times and realities, and allow students to feel welcome and a part of that space. So I still think there's a place for books. I still, though, also think that there's a reality of technology and the kind of furniture that might be provided to support that change. It's sort of a combination of a Starbucks with a mobile office and something in between to provide places where students can feel welcome but productive at the same time.
Thank you.
Tom?
There's been a lot of talk and discussion about how effective standardized tests are in measuring children's knowledge. Where do you stand on standardized testing, especially coming from Canada and their tests and the tests here? So,
well, I can certainly say that there's also standardized testing in Ontario, and in fact, I remember as a young teacher that I spent a few summers involved in grading those standardized tests. It wasn't called MCAS, but nevertheless, I think that standardized tests have a place in terms of one means to gather data. That it should be considered as an opportunity to capture information that's it provides a window into the learning that has taken place, but that it's only a snapshot of that learning. That is to say that whatever point in time that a standardized test might be administered, it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of what a student knows and is able to do at that point in time. But it's not the only indication of the extent of the learning that has or has not taken place. And I think that I believe it's very unfortunate, but I know it's happening, where school systems and our communities become so hyper-focused on a particular score that's associated with a standardized test that what's being lost sight of is the fact that there's much more that's going on in a classroom. There's much more going on for a child's experience and a teacher's experience, that can't, nor do I think it should, in any way reflect either success or failure to that point in time. I think that the data that's captured as part of a standardized test, if it's a test that is reasonable and fair and has been aligned to the standards, I think that that's appropriate. But that the data should be taken in conjunction with other data that has also been hopefully gathered by educators to help inform decisions, whether it be around a particular approach for a lesson or a unit or a topic or a skill, but that it's one piece of data and it's not the only thing. And I have definitely learned that sometimes there needs to be license from the leadership or the leadership team to convey that message, that we shouldn't put all of the eggs in that basket of one standardized test, in our context here, MCAS. We shouldn't discount it because if it's aligned with the standards, then it has a place, but it's only one place. It's only one measure. And we should, I think, therefore, take it for what it is in conjunction with the other data that hopefully has also been captured and is being used as part of making decisions in either moving the program or the respective services for a student forward.
Manny?
Thank you. I want to go back to the topic of communication and information because I think it's important, and we've had some challenges. Sometimes the lack of communication and lack of information has led to too much communication via social media, and sometimes not in a positive way. We've had challenges both with students and parents, where it has affected both students and parents. You had mentioned leveraging different technologies as far as communicating, so I really want to know how you feel, what you think the role of social media is in education in district. How will you manage it? What do you see as the positives of using social media? And how would you respond to negative issues that arise from the use of social media?
Yes. So I do believe that there are great benefits from the utilization of social media to help push out information or to bring to light information around a specific school or a district. That as I myself become more, I guess, educated or informed about how I can utilize social media to leverage topics or areas of interest for me, whether it be news or some other topic. In this day and age of information overload, the appropriate positioned tweet, if you will, that provides a link to something that I might be interested in is, I think, how a larger part of our society is transitioning or shifting to. And I think to leverage that in a helpful way is of real benefit. And I've seen that own shift in my own communication efforts over the last few years, where I came to realize that so many people, of course, are on email, parents, guardians in the community. But what's happened, as we all know, is that there are far more emails coming from somewhere nowadays, that emails get buried and they get lost. And so despite great intentions of crafting that perfect email that you provide additional links or directions of where to access more information, I know I had many conversations with many of a well-intentioned and very informed parents or members of the community who say, I didn't see that email. And so to that end, I think leveraging social media can be helpful, within reason, but it certainly can be helpful. It's a great way to boost your usership when you also say you're going to use it for snow day cancellations, but even in a greater sense, I think it has a role and a place. But what I actually have experience with as well is the ill or unintended effects and the reality of social media, and how it does create a whole different landscape, if you will, for which, as a school leader, to operate within. And I'll explain. Last year, as some of you might know, the Acton Boxborough communities and district went through a really tough time with a number of student suicides. And I remember vividly the very first, I believe it was the very first suicide that we had that occurred over a weekend. It was a Saturday, late afternoon. And as I, in my position, was indeed I was the very first person in the school district to be communicated with from the police about this tragedy. It was almost at the same identical time as that, or same exact time, that social media, Facebook, as I seem to recall, began to take off. And what was happening was that there was misinformation that was being pushed out there about the incident. Totally untrue. And what was even more difficult is it was not just being pushed out by students, but also adults in the community. And in fact, in a couple of situations, staff. There were an awful lot of staff who also were parents in the community. And it just only complicated the situation so much more, as you might imagine. And so it required a response of a different sort. It required a response, first off, with staff, in reaching out to staff. This was a weekend, and I and my team were working on Sunday morning to figure out our communication plan and our response plan. We had this whole other reality of social media taking place, and that was on fire, if you will, so to speak, that we needed to contend with. And that incorporated and included messaging to staff as a whole to try and clarify some misinformation out there, as it did for the wider community. And so in that moment and in that instance, I saw the dangers of social media. And I learned that it's going to be impossible to ever outpace a retweet or a like on Facebook. But what it requires is, as a leader, thinking holistically about what does the message need to be, and how can I get it out there to try and at least not keep pace, not beat, but clarify and in some cases clean up misinformation that's been put out there. And so going through that experience was really impactful, because I realized right there and then that in this day and age, when it comes to really difficult information, it changes the dynamic of communication in a whole different way that has to be contended with. Because I think if you don't, then people will glom onto that in a way that's only destructive or counterproductive.
There's been a discussion taking root in the world of education. Educators and lecturers Jack Marr and Bill Daggett. Jack Marr lectures that in order for our children not to have to compete for jobs of the future with machines, we need to abandon our current practices of teaching knowledge-based skills and instead teach them soft skills such as values, believing, and independent thinking, caring for others, building individual and unique skills within our kids. Dr. Bill Daggett, also an educational lecturer around the world, has also stated that the world is currently entering speaks of the fourth industrial revolution that the world is currently entering, and how education needs to move forward with more rigorous and relevant skills and knowledge for all students in order for them to be able to access the jobs of tomorrow. What is your view of this new, well, I don't think it's a new discussion per se, but it's newer to me, and if chosen as superintendent, how will or could it drive education within our district?
Yeah, certainly, I think the reality that we have before us is that, and maybe unlike any other time in the recent past, where public education, and I say that, public education, I really do believe needs to take stock of the readiness for ensuring that the students that we have that are going to be graduating are ready for the world tomorrow, that they're going to inherit. The problem or the challenge is we don't know what that exactly looks like, of course. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what is incumbent upon education within the public education setting are a number of things. I do think, first off, I'll start by saying that I do believe very much in that take, that approach, that belief that there is a requirement to think differently about what we're providing in terms of educational experiences for students to try best to ready them for that world tomorrow. That it can't or should not be any longer just thought about as disciplines in isolation, departmental disciplines in isolation, but rather an integration of multiple disciplines. That there seems to be already right now enough clarity around what businesses, I've done a fair bit of reading about this because I think it's both fascinating but also critically important if we're going to try and take stock of best readying our students for the world that they're going to inherit. There seems to be enough clarity from business leaders around what they are looking for in the ideal graduate, if you will. The ability to think critically, the ability to communicate, the ability to collaborate, the ability to be flexible, and so on. And sometimes, in a traditional approach, if I may use that term, we don't always have structured or cultivated situations for students to experience and be asked to do those kind of things. And that's not I know that's a statement that doesn't apply everywhere or to everyone, certainly, but in lots of pockets it does. And so one of the things that I've been doing actually a fair bit of reading about and thinking about to try and get there is to help develop with a community the profile of a graduate. We start with thinking about our vision and our mission and our strategic plan. And I think in any school district that is looking to be high functioning and trying to represent the ideals and the hopes and wishes of the community as a whole, that's really important. But I think also extending that to think about that profile of a graduate and what and how that profile would be developed ideally would be certainly with school committee, members of the community, educators, as well as the business community. What do we think it would be more important here in Wilmington that our graduates should have as a skill set? And working backwards from there in terms of trying to structure along the pathway that we have them for the appropriate learning experiences to get there, to acquire those skills, that knowledge, those understandings. And even though it may never be able to encompass all of what the world before a second grade student might look like, because that profile will have to be revisited regularly, I think it gives us great hope at a much deeper level than just a curriculum map, per se, around what students should be able to learn in math. And I think that there's lots of ideas and lots of experience that can help shape that. And I think that that's the kind of exciting work that to be proactive and to try and seek to advance learning experiences for students to the next level, we in education need to start to be thinking at.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Brand, what is your experience with culturally proficient instruction, its role in schools, and your work with teachers and administrators?
So I think first off, from a philosophical standpoint, I think that public education needs to have as a cornerstone or as a foundation a number of different things, but that includes inclusivity and respect for diversity. That we know that our communities are changing rapidly, and that that change needs to be both embraced, needs to be both honored, and needs to be respected and appropriately and effectively dealt with in terms of the inclusion of all students in our classrooms, in our programs, and in our schools. And my experience has certainly taught me that that has to be much deeper than just lip service paid to saying that we're inclusive. But it also must carve out a plan for how we're going to provide appropriate professional development and learning for our staff, and for all staff, I might add, not just perhaps our licensed or certified professional staff, but all staff, to know how best to create welcoming environments where students feel safe, where the community feels safe and included. That comes down to building a culture that representative of those things, where a place where people can feel safe and included. It goes back to I mentioned the training that in Needham, when I was a principal there, I saw the critical importance of taking a district-wide approach, making it a priority, incorporating into our respective strategic plan, and developing a plan of action respectively for how we were going to further advance the knowledge and understanding of our school leaders, to help them respectively work with staff to support those learnings, to make sure that our environments were the things that I mentioned earlier. The reality of, again, of our citizenry, of the students that we're serving is ever dynamic, it's ever changing, and in so doing, we have to be very mindful as a school leader, as a superintendent, as a school committee, in structuring environments where people do feel safe and respected.
Thank you.
Dr. Brand, what would you say is the most important thing or things that a school committee can do to support their superintendent? And conversely, what is the most important thing or things that a superintendent can do to support his or her school committee?
So I think that when I think about this relationship, I think about it as a team. As a team that is working in unison, where there is open dialogue, where there's trust, and where there's respect, and where there's honesty that serves as the sort of central tenets of the relationship. I also think that and hope that there is there are a number of other things that collectively as a team we would work on. The first and foremost, that we're representing the citizens of Wilmington and trying to ensure through an effort to gather information and insight around what do people want in their school system, what do the people of Wilmington want in their school system. And that usually, from my experience and thoughts, takes shape in a vision and a mission. And so I think that that's the starting point, that the superintendent works at the pleasure of the school committee, and the school committee is elected body, of course, from the wider citizenry. And so together, there needs to be that as a starting point. I think secondly, a respect for the fact that the structure of the school system is established through your policies, and that there's a collective participation in developing policies that help provide the structure for the programs and the services and all aspects really of the school system. I think that the way that we ultimately are successful is to seek to be accountable, and you asking the superintendent, myself, to ensure that we have checks and balances in terms of the accountability of our system. Are we performing? Are we achieving what we said we were going to do? Is the budget supporting appropriately the programs and services? And that accountability piece, I think, needs to be ever present to ensure that the organization keeps moving forward and is being also at the same time responsive to changes in the environment or the conditions or so on. I think that those things need to be in place, and that's what I certainly would bring to the relationship, if you will. Thank you.
So as a follow-up to that, this is kind of a two-parter, if you will. As a superintendent, and you're wanting to have a good working relationship with all members of your school committee, how do you approach the situation when a school committee member goes off script? You know, you catch wind that maybe they're going in a different direction than the working relationship.
Right. So a couple of things. First off, and if I may, I'll just go back briefly to the previous question to relate to this. What I would also, this is where if I could add a piece to my answer, I will, and that is making sure that there's operating norms that are in place, clarity around how we're going to work together, because I know my response there was perhaps a little bit more of a 20,000 sort of view, but I would first off go to those norms, and I would engage the chair or respectively the chair or vice chair, whatever are part of those norms in terms of dealing with, as they sometimes do, situations that come up where there may be a member who has gone, did you say off script?
Off
page?
script.
Yes, off script. And with the full respect of that line of authority I feel very good about the relationships in the two communities where I've served as a district leader in cultivating strong and open relationships with members of the school committee. But there's also the reality of the chair, the vice chair, and that model or that structure, if you will. So I would engage his or her assistance from the outset. And I recognize the importance, and hopefully there's been a trusting relationship that has been built and that's been established, and would seek to ask to be able to connect with, to meet with that individual, to be able to try and better understand what the, what the issue might be, the point of view might be, and to try and be able to work through that. I would hope that a school committee member would, my goal is to ensure that every member of the committee feels comfortable in approaching me, that I believe very much, with the utmost respect for the structure of the chair, vice chair, that there's hopefully also the opportunity to be able to sit regularly with school committee members to keep an open dialogue in place. I believe and have found that goes a long way in when there are issues that arise that can then be dealt with and worked through.
Okay, and just as a continuation along that line, members of the school committee are out at the grocery store. They're on the sidelines at the basketball game, the Little League games, and they hear things, or things are purposely brought to their attention, some appropriately, some not so much. What is your recommendation, or what would be your guidance for structure for the reporting of such hearings?
So I very much do believe in the thought of no surprises. And that I recognize, it sort of loops in our earlier conversations around communication. And there are lots of different, lots of different groups, of course, for which as a superintendent, one needs to be mindful of. First and foremost is the school committee, the governing body that then is part of that team that I also talked about. And so I think that the notion of no surprises goes an awful long way for both the superintendent as well as the school committee. And in as much as when I might be at that grocery store or at Starbucks or wherever it might be and hear some, my job, I believe, out of many, is to certainly keep the school committee informed and apprised. And I would hope that the same would hold true as well for school committee. Big or small, it certainly can be impactful in terms of misinformation. And if there might be an opportunity to be proactive and clarify perhaps misinformation out there, I think that goes to everyone's best interests.
Great, thank you.
It's so interesting being at the end of the line. I don't know if Tom agrees with me. I've gone over these over and over. You're touching pieces of everything that I wanted to talk about. But this one I'll ask. I know you've touched pieces on it, but I'm wondering, I'm thinking of advocacy. And is there anything that you would personally, as your personal advocacy, want to explore if you came to Wilmington? And why would that be what you'd like to explore personally?
I suppose there's a few things, but two that come to mind. And I hope that please tell me if I'm getting off base from your question. So I am very passionate about attention to the social and emotional well-being of students. And I like to think that and I know that that core belief started actually the first time I stepped into a classroom in my very first teaching position. The school that I was a part of had a student advisory program in place. And I had, as I mentioned, some of you may have heard this before, the opportunity to stay with a group of students for all 3 years that I was teaching with them. And those two aspects put me on a path to recognize that the stronger the bonds are with students, more than just as the classroom teacher, the recognition of the social emotional realities of students is so very important. And that was a different time period, and there wasn't necessarily the same attention in the research around social emotional well-being and resilience and so on. But true to form, it's become something that has been identified through the research as critically important in helping raise healthy, productive young people. But it's also been along the way, as I've experienced, unfortunately, some tragedies. I spoke of the situation in Acton-Boxborough, but just other incidents that I reflect back upon and realize that while it is, of course, first and foremost, the mission of a school system to ensure that a young person is ready and truly prepared from that academic standpoint to move on to the world before them, there also is a stark reality that we as educators need to attend to that other well-being piece, and all of which is associated with helping develop skills for controlling your emotions and conflict resolution, all of this variety of things. And so I would be deeply interested in exploring that with the respective leadership team and the staff here to really, like I would with so many other things, get a sense of where you are at as a community, as a district, and what the opportunities are going forward. I guess the other thing that, if I may speak to, came across in the profile that you developed, in the superintendent profile. And what I seem to note in there was that there seems to be some degree of concern around equity of resources across your district, across your schools. And I mentioned earlier a belief that I have that as public educational institutions, I think that we should be operating school systems and not systems of schools. Mm-hmm. Systems of schools meaning different schools with different amounts of things that are different than their counterparts. I would be very interested to learn more and understand better about what that looks like, because I do think that there needs to be a commitment, again, in the public educational setting where there's equal access and equal opportunity. And so that's a core belief of what I think is really important in overseeing a public educational institution, and I'd be very interested in digging into that a little bit more.
Thank you, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, they've hit a lot of my questions, so I'm going to have to go off script here. I guess the one that's very popular is dealing with, where do you stand on the issue of changing the school times for schools? That's been a very hot topic for a lot of different communities.
Yes, yes, it has. So a couple of things. First off, I'll take the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my work most recently, Acton-Boxborough, and it's this very topic. When I came into the district, as I would here, I embarked upon a pretty robust entry plan, which was the opportunity to gather an awful lot of data, an awful lot of insight and perspective from all stakeholder groups around what was of concern, what was working well, and what were areas for improvement. And one of the pieces, absolutely, that I heard a lot was the concern around the stress of students, their well-being, and the start time piece. And so that was in my first year, and by the end of the first year, I began to, I had my entry plan completed, and I began to formulate my specific goals going into my second year of my superintendency. And one of my goals was to, that I decided to do, was commission the superintendent's wellness committee. The district has a wellness committee, and as the superintendent, it was a wonderful opportunity to have a cross-section of stakeholders representing community, educators, parents, and so on. And the commission, if you will, for that group was to generate a report after digging into the research around start times and its connection to health and well-being of young adolescents, and to take stock of what other schools around the area and across the country were doing on the topic. It led to a wonderful report. I won't take credit for that report because I didn't myself generate the report, but the committee did. And that report very clearly pointed to, in the direction of myself as the superintendent, at the direction of the school committee, looking to do something about our start times. The start time in Acton-Boxborough are fairly similar to yours here at the secondary level, early. And last school year, I structured a new task force with a specific intent to explore what would be necessary to change the times, what would be the costs associated with everything from transportation and everything else. That task force generated a report that before I left the district, I shared with the school committee and the community. And I'm proud to be able to say that that community voted about 2 months, I think now ago, to change their start times for next year. So I've got experience with this, and as I've had the chance to better understand the research and better understand the connections between the start time and well-being, they're critical, and the research speaks to that. The implications of really early start times on actually the health of our young people. When I think about the discussions that are being held in so many communities, and I'm going to assume it's here in Wilmington too, around the concern around the growing stress on our young people. I think that there is enough account in the literature that speaks to the fact that it is a stressful time to be a young person. And what I've also come to conclude is that there doesn't seem to be any disagreement about the fact that a certain degree of stress is okay. In fact, it's important, because we know that dealing with stress and dealing with it effectively is a really important thing as you get older. But excessive stress, unnecessary stress, is not. And there are two areas, as I've come to learn truly, where school systems interconnect with or intersect with this. And one is start times, and the other is homework, and the homework discussion, which is not your question, so I'll leave that off to the side. But I am convinced that where we can look at it, I think we should. I've learned that it's complicated, perhaps far more complicated of an issue than some might think, and I get that. But I do think that the research is very clear, actually, on the topic. So it's one that, especially now as I struggle with a middle schooler who's out the door at 6:55, I see the effects. And I do think we should try and do something about it.
As a follow-up, how do you feel about homework? I'm kidding.
I want to go back to the topic of communication. I feel it's really important, and how you communicate to the members of the school system and in the community. So how would you convey to the members of the school system and members of the community that you want them to share their ideas and concerns with you? How do you convince them that you'll seriously consider what they have to say? And more importantly, how would you deal with them when they express views that you may oppose?
So I'll start again by saying that I have definitely learned that there needs to, in this time period anyway, when people's ability to, everyone is busy. People are maxed out, and even with the absolute best intentions of anyone, raising families, jobs, busy lives just in general. And even having the privilege and pleasure to work in other education-focused communities that I've had, I'm going to assume that it might be similar here in Wilmington, it is tough to get people's attention. And so what I've learned is that you got to try and go back again and again, multiple times. That I think I mentioned earlier, I would rather over-communicate than be criticized of under-communicating. And I've learned that the pursuit of multiple modalities, if I can use that term, whether it be a newsletter, whether it be, we talked about social media, whether it be leveraging local television to do a small snippet that I started to explore, I think I called them vodcasts, but has a place and a purpose. Hitting the message again and again and again, and from multiple vantage points, multiple angles, and leveraging whatever it is, I think is necessary. I just think it comes with the territory. And I don't think it's anything that anyone needs to be apologetic about or anything. It's just the nature of the times. But I think if there's a commitment to communicate, that effort needs to be there. And I would push that message out if I were the superintendent coming in numerous ways, on numerous occasions, to make it very clear that I wanted to hear from people. Some school systems, I don't believe you've done this, actually now are starting, I forget the exact name of it, but there's probably different vehicles out there where they have right on their webpage it's like a Let's Talk or something like that, that allows for even the citizenry to share their ideas that way. I think as many possible ways that my message can get out there will hopefully impress upon people the commitment and the dedication to want to hear voices. You know, I'm of the belief that, as an example, if there's an evening forum or a morning coffee and 3 people show up, that's okay. I wouldn't see that as a waste of my time. I would see that that's valuable to make a connection with 3 people, and that has a place. But working at it in such a way and coming back to it time and time again, I think hopefully will lead people to realize that there's a willingness to partner, there's a willingness to be open to communication. Not liking the feedback, I forget how you framed it, the second piece, but.
Views that you may oppose.
Yeah, so that's happened on occasion, you know, what I found to be the most effective is to do what's necessary to take the time to hear that perspective or the perspectives, and that might also be engaging somebody else on my team or somebody else in the district to help also engage in the conversation. One of the things that I pride myself on through feedback that I've acquired along the way is that people have always felt that I'm open and approachable and that they've been listened to, that they've been heard. And as it is, this is a people business. It starts with people, it starts with relationships, and I think that is only appropriate, and especially in the role of superintendent of schools.
Thank you.
What has been your greatest professional disappointment, and what did you learn from it?
I'd like to say my pause is I don't have any disappointments, but that wouldn't be true. I'll go back to my days as principal in Pollard, in Needham, Pollard Middle School. And I remember vividly that when I entered the school, I embarked upon an entry plan of sorts, a little bit different than a superintendent, but you know, I took the time to gather the thoughts and ideas and feedback from the staff. It was about 125 full and part-time staff. And one of the things that I came to realize through that effort was that there was a really strong desire by, I think it was 70, I actually remember that right, it was 78% of the staff very much wanted to move forward with a student advisory program. Now, this was great for me as a very dedicated and committed middle school educator to the idea of student advisory, small groups, getting to know an adult in the building well. And so this was just perfect, I thought. And so we had an education foundation, similar to that you do here, Needham Education Foundation, and I put forth and applied for a grant to help support the planning, the development, and the implementation of the advisory program. It was planned for over a year to put into place the pieces in the foundation to train staff before we were going to then launch it the following year. But as things rolled out, I came to realize that indeed there were many people that really had indicated that they wanted an advisory program. But as we got into it, what started to bubble up our surface was more and more staff feeling like they couldn't engage in work, that they weren't trained appropriately to interface with or interconnect with young people in that way. And that was very frustrating to me as an educator, even though I was a building leader at the time, as an educator, with trying to reconcile the fact that we had provided the training, we provided the tools, and we provided the resources, and it was hitting this huge hurdle or this huge bump. And it became disappointing because it was a plan collectively developed, and yet it also demonstrated that even when you think even when you think you have everything in place, sometimes things still need to be circled back on. You need to slow things down. And I didn't think that a year to implement it was too fast or too quick. But that was frustrating because what I knew was hanging in the balance was a large population of 1,100 students, 6th through 8th grade, that were losing out on an opportunity to make really what I think are pretty important connections. And I knew that piece was lacking. If I may just quick, we did an exercise where we had all of the teachers, all of the students' names listed in a large meeting room. And I did that again, didn't I? And all of the faculty went around, and a wonderful faculty, a wonderful community, went around and placed a dot or sticker beside each child's name that they had some kind of connection with, whether it be coaching or student council or something. It was an amazing exercise. I would do it again in a heartbeat. And you could see how many students didn't have connections with adults. And they were a wonderful staff, a wonderful, wonderful staff. But yet this reality was sitting there along the frustration piece that I mentioned ago. And so that was disappointing. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Do you do a time check or you?
Go ahead.
Okay. Can you just briefly describe for us the professional development opportunities you've provided related to special education?
Related to special education. So when I began in Wareham Middle School, I'll start there, it became quickly apparent that we had far more pullout of service provision for students on an individual education plan than push-in or inclusion. And completely counter to my belief of what ultimately is the ideal that we should be shooting for, to have students in a least restrictive environment and where and when possible in the regular educational classroom. So after redesigning the school towards a house structure and strengthening the teaming approach, which is my as I came to learn what you and was pleased to see and hear you have here for the most part in Wilmington. My work started there in response to your question because we had an awful lot of professional development to do for both special educators as well as the regular classroom teachers to understand how best that they could work together, how best they could be planning for the effective inclusion and push-in, if you will, of students receiving specialized support. So it started there, moving on to the Pollard Middle School, a large school, as I mentioned, and the reality there was we had an awful lot of very specific programs, some very intensive special education programs. And as those grew, as the cohort of students grew that were a part of those, it required myself, and we had a special education director at the middle school, a dedicated special education director, partnered quite heavily around making sure that we were providing appropriate training and professional development to the teachers that had students that were part of their team and part of those programs. So, and truly, I mean, that's continued in a different capacity or different way as I made my transition to the central office. I guess first off, I'll say that the commitment needs to be there that that kind of training that might be necessary to support students with specialized needs to be delivered to all staff. That I'm far away from the thought that it's targeted just for special educators, that I think every educator has a need to be to feel skilled and feel that they can help contribute to the delivery of service. And so the training, when we think about that in that way, needs to span really the entire grade level, the fire department, or whatever the case might be. It is in the best interest of our students, and I think it helps provide the least restrictive environment, truly, when we have educators, even if they don't have the title of special education, feeling competent and able to truly support students in their classrooms.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Brandon, I'm sure it feels like we've just started. But we're getting very close on time. I'd like to see if we can squeeze in a couple more questions. And I definitely want to give you some opportunity to close this out. Can you, naturally I've lost my place. How much do you value how much value do you place on the performing arts in the public schools, and how would your budget reflect that?
I think the performing arts, like so many other opportunities for students, has an immense place in any school system. That I truly believe, and it's a firm set of beliefs, that the purpose of any effective schooling experience for students needs to be able to expose them to a variety of learning opportunities. To learn about the world around them, to learn about themselves, to experience, to explore. And the performing arts absolutely is a part of that. That I know from experiences that there always will be some students who, depending on their particular family situation, may have the opportunity, may have the push, may have the means to explore performing arts outside of the regular school day. But I also know that there are an awful lot of students that will never have that chance. And part and parcel with, I think, a central mission, a purpose of public education should be to allow students to explore as much as they can to learn about themselves and the world around them, as I said. And so that has to be, I think, a cornerstone of any educational experience. So much so that when I was in Pollard at the middle school there, we had a schedule that didn't allow all students to experience all programs, both in the performing arts sense and some of our other art programs. That there was sometimes, for some students, a competing class that they had to take. That did not seem right to me. Didn't seem appropriate to me, and so through a multi-pronged effort involving members of my team, we restructured that schedule so that students could have, there was no choice. They had access to all of the disciplines, including the performing arts. And that included even if they weren't playing an instrument. We created a musical education program for them. So to the budgetary piece, to me, it should be right alongside any of the other disciplines that we would structure a budget for to ensure that the staff are available and present and a part of the overall experience for the young people.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. A little bit of a two-parter, but you can tie it into one answer if you choose. How do you perceive the superintendent's role in the greater community outside of the school buildings? And in answering that, just share a few examples with us of how you've partnered with community group leaders or municipal leaders.
Sure. So I think it's vital. I think that when I think about the school system and the role of the superintendent of schools, it's not overseeing or leading a large department as an island unto itself. That it is clearly a school system is, in most communities, the centerpiece for that community. But going with that becomes, I think, an abundant need, a critical need to ensure that there's strong, respectful relationships with the community as a whole. That includes town leaders. And and as I mentioned on a couple of occasions today, far outside of just the critically important budgetary time period. I think that strong, respectful bonds and relationships that have a governing body or governing bodies, and the citizens as a whole well aware of what's going on in the school system, well aware of the priorities, well aware of the accomplishments and so on, I think is critical. Because every single member of the community, in some way, even if they don't have a student in the school system, has a stake in the school system. And so to that end, I think as a superintendent, it becomes incumbent, not just upon myself alone, but certainly to help lead the opportunities to forge those strong connections and relationships. So that outreach piece has taken certainly different forms. Most recently, as an example, in Acton-Boxborough, we embarked upon a robust capital plan, the development of capital plan, of which I was really pleased to see that you have in place here. The district did not have that. And as part of that effort, we put together a visioning group, an educational visioning group, to help come together and help us as a district plan for what the future of our buildings might look like going forward, if there was the opportunity to pursue capital and infrastructure improvements. There was a very deliberate outreach that certainly I led as a superintendent to ensure that it was a large group. It was about 80 people, but there was a vast number of people who did not have children in the school system, representative of town leaders, of our some of our senior citizens in town, and they were part of that process. Just to stay on that for a moment, when we came to start to share the capital plan and the work that started to come out of that, I and a couple of members of my team went out to the senior centers in both towns on a couple of occasions. Again, that commitment to be reaching out, sharing the information, and sharing the news that was going on in the system. I've learned that there's invaluable resources that are out there, and to be able to try and forge strong connections can be of benefit for many. And sometimes we just need to go looking for them, but I think we should, because there's lots of people who want to get involved, and sometimes they're just not asked. And I think that one of the roles of superintendent is to try and address that reality.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Since you have begun this process of applying for superintendent of Wilmington, has anything kind of popped up that you didn't expect? Something you learned about us, about yourself, about the process, anything that?
No, I don't think so, but I guess what did emerge or has emerged, and that's why there's great value, although it's a lot of work on your part and so many others to make these visits possible, is the opportunity. It's one thing to read things from afar and be an outsider looking in, but today provided a feeling that you got to get inside, you got to get under the hood a little bit, even just for a brief moment, and see and feel the passion, the commitment, the pride that certainly seems to be here. I've shared with you, a few of you, that I've been watching you. I've been watching these meetings for some time now, to try and get a sense of your community. And I've heard you speak about it. I've heard different people making presentations and so on speak about it. But it was quite moving to be able to actually experience some of that, even just for a brief moment today, as I had a chance to be in your district. So I'll leave that at that.
Great, thank you.
Well, it's glad to meet the one viewer that we do have. Our ratings just tripled. I guess, I noticed in your thing you had some experience with bullying, with some things there. I can't think of what it is, but what kind of strategies would you employ to combat bullying on and offline? That has been kind of a big issue going on in schools and everywhere.
Yeah, there certainly is absolutely a need, like so many other topics to be addressed by the schools, not exclusively by the schools. I think that bullying is one of those topics where it also has to be part of a larger community conversation in partnership with the schools. But a couple of things. Certainly, I think that there needs to be a strong behavior code in place that is clear, that is understood by all, both students and families, around what is and is not permissible, and that what's tolerated or not tolerated in our schools. And it can't just be a document that lives in a handbook somewhere, but there has to be enough time to help inform and educate people about that. So I think it starts there, and I think that it continues from there in terms of helping young people starting when they enter the school system, and hopefully shaping their experiences using similar language from staff as they make their way from, as is the case here, building to building, and that there's consistency within buildings and across the district in terms of how things, to the extent that that's possible, can be dealt with. But that also needs to include an outreach component with parents and the guardians as well. And can't take for granted that our parents or guardians all read those handbooks necessarily, or all understand the behavior code, or all understand the expectations. I think there needs to be deliberacy to address that. The same holds true for online bullying, that there's no question that, well, it would be ideal to be able to say that what happens outside the schoolhouse doesn't, find its way in. That's not the reality. And so providing educational opportunities, sometimes that might be from experts outside the district, or it might not be, to help ensure that kids become educated on what's appropriate use of technology, as well as parents, is a necessary piece. It's not, from my experience or my belief, a one-shot exchange or one-shot meeting. It's something that in totality needs to be revisited regularly. But students need to know that it's not acceptable behavior. And the educators and those that are working with them in the schoolhouse need to know how to respond and engage parents as well to help work through those scenarios when they do happen.
Thank you.
Dr. Brandt, thank you for taking all of our questions. Despite the setup here, it looks like a Senate hearing. At no point did you take the fifth, so we appreciate that. Would you like to offer us any closing remarks, any closing thoughts?
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It really, I know some of you had asked, it really was a great day. You did a tremendous job structuring time to get a sense of your district. And as I think I've alluded to a couple of times, you have clearly an awful lot here to be proud of. One thing you didn't ask me is, why am I here? Why Wilmington? So I'll answer my own question, I guess. And I've said this on a couple of occasions. First off, my commitment, my desire, my intention is to continue to work in the Commonwealth as a superintendent of schools in a community that takes great pride in and commitment to public education. I know that with that comes high expectations, but I believe that when those expectations are in place, so too is the commitment to truly collaborate and truly try and work together in service for young people. And that brings about great things. I read very carefully and with great interest in the profile that you developed with, I think, Dr. Betancourt's assistance as part of NESDEC. But also, I have to assume a document that, as Dr. Betancourt himself spoke about, captures the thoughts and the ideas and the things that are on people's minds throughout your community as it relates to the superintendent and the next person who comes into this role. And I have to say that in reading through that, I see an awful lot of areas where I believe my knowledge and my background experiences would and are be a strong match for those. Your focus on communication and your questions here after reading the profile doesn't surprise me. And I believe that I come to the table with a great strength in communication and people skills and a commitment to recognition of the critical importance of that, of the work that we do. I also see in there your concern around change and management of change and what that looks like in overseeing a large organization like yours. And having worked in both a variety of organizations, school districts, as well as large, some larger, some smaller than Wilmington, I absolutely know that I have a tremendous depth of experience in effectively and reasonably managing change, making sure that there's opportunity for input, there's a collectivity in the decision-making and contributions of all stakeholders, and that there's identification of a plan that coalesces around the most important things going forward and keeping that reasonable. So that profile was really helpful, and in part, I'm also here because I see a strong alignment with that. And I guess finally, my sense is that as a school community, you've been enduring some pretty challenging times over the last few years, and my sense is that you are looking for stability. Stability in a leader to come into this role to help work in conjunction with the school committee in service to the families and students throughout the town. And I can offer you that. I can offer you that stability in that the superintendency work, it took me maybe a little while to understand and figure it out, but it's the job that I want to hold. It's not a job that's going to take me anywhere else. I am looking to make a long-term commitment to a community, and very much can provide you with that stability going forward. And maybe the final thing is that it's also clear from what I've read and come to learn that as a school community, you take great pride in what you have before you, but you're also very much looking to move to that next level, to continue to improve, to be known as one of the highest performing school districts in the state. And I believe that my experiences in working in some very strong communities in a variety of roles has provided me with great insight to know what it takes to structure a school system to achieve those ends. And so I would be delighted to have the opportunity to bring those experiences here. So thank you for the conversation, and thank you for your questions tonight.
Well, Dr. Brennan, on behalf of the school committee, thank you. And on behalf of the community, thank you very much for your interest in this position and for taking the time to meet with us all day today and to field our questions. We very much appreciate your time. At this point, we will take a bit of a recess and invite our next candidate in. But thank you again, Dr. Brennan.
Thank you.